Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. We have a great show for you this evening. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Pamela Snow with us, and she is a professor at La Trobe University, the School of Education. She has written a book in 2017 called Making Sense of Interventions for Children with Developmental Disorders. She was a co-author of that book. And in 2020, she established the Science of Language and Reading Lab, SOLAR, in the School of Education. And she has a wonderful blog, The Snow Report, and that's what we're going to be looking at this evening. Her latest blog is School Leaders and Reading Instruction, Time to Demand Less Rather Than More Autonomy. And we are so pleased to have this opportunity. It just came out Saturday, the 28th. And here in America, it's the 29th, Sunday. And we're on a different time frame, of course. And in Australia, it is Monday. So this is so exciting to be able to do this. And we thank Pam for doing this with us on such short notice. So in the article, Pam, welcome, by the way.
Thank you, Faith and Judy. Can I just jump in there and mention my colleague, Professor Tanya Seri, who is the co-director of the Solar Lab, because we established it together, and I do want to make sure that it's not just me doing that work.
Yes, and I apologize that I didn't.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. So you had written in your article different points about the importance of leadership getting on board. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I pulled out right away was you had written, they are called, excuse me, that's the wrong one. This is what I want to say. Well, the experts don't agree on which approaches are best, so we school leaders can continue to make our own call on this. Basically saying that that's pretty much how they're justifying. Some school leaders are justifying their decisions by saying, well, you know what, if there's not consistent agreement about something, we're just going to go with it and do what we think. Could you talk about that? Because I found that to be very interesting and so true.
Thanks, Faith. Look, I think from my interaction with, and I interact with a lot of school leaders here in Australia, certainly the ones who are making changes in their reading instruction in their schools tell me that was their thinking. I mean, some people currently say it to me that, well, you experts can't agree. So I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because other people are doing it. But I have heard from a number of school leaders who are on a journey away from balanced literacy towards more structured, explicit teaching, that was their kind of reassurance to themselves in a way that they didn't need to be going to the effort and the discomfort and creating the disruption in their school because, well, there's a range of opinions. So therefore, the logic goes a range of approaches must be in scope. So we'll keep using the approach that we've been using for quite a while. Of course, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny, but we can understand at a human level why people might think that way.
Yes. So interestingly enough, you listened, I believe, to the Steve Dykstra episode.
I did.
And he made a point of saying near the end of our conversation that, it's very easy to go in this direction when you are unencumbered by truth and facts. And that's something that I think it's it's quite easy to welcome in something that seems so much fun and easier, as you pointed out, and stay with something like that when you don't have to stand up to the scrutiny of factual information. And although, sometimes they say that they do have a lot of evidence in what they're thinking. Judy, what are your thoughts about this in terms of, leadership and their role in trying to bring a structured approach into schools, primarily public schools?
Well, first, I want to thank Pam for being here. I'm extremely excited to have our first guest from Down Under. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I'm honored.
And I'm extremely grateful that you're here because you're in the future right now. Today's Sunday here, Monday. So you probably know what's going on a little bit more in the literacy world than we do because it might look different tomorrow. But but basically, in terms of what I'm seeing, so for many years, I started in the New York City Department of Education about in 1997, and then I started to be a classroom teacher in 2000. And what I saw most back then, in the good old days, was a lot of balanced literacy. And actually, before I saw balanced literacy, right when I started teaching, I saw sprinkles of phonics, and it was on its way out. And there was a lot of senior teachers in the building that knew that that was the best approach, but they really had no choice. So a lot of teachers still closed the door. And even though we were told balanced literacy, we still made sure that we had grammar going on and phonics instruction. But little by little, with time, it was less and less and less and less. And unfortunately, you could be in one zip code, and what instruction looked like in one zip code versus another zip code could be dramatically different. Now, we know on social media, we hear everybody saying, oh my God, TC, TC. And TC was a big part of the problem, but there were also schools that had absolutely no curriculum. And I would actually name those curriculums garbage. It was complete garbage in a lot of schools for many, many years. And I am so proud of New York right now. I mean, New York has a whole set of its own problems right now that we're dealing with on so many different levels. But in terms of education, we are finally buckling down the law, but it took a long time. So now what year is it? 2023? New York City schools now have mandated research and evidence-based curriculums in every public school, regardless of your zip code. You could walk down the block, you could go to Manhattan, you could go to the poorest districts. Everywhere there's a curriculum. Now, as Maureen Ruby, one of our prior guests, said, a curriculum is just a tool. It's not going to be perfect. But right now, we have leveled the playing field somewhat. Kids are starting to break the reading code. It's going to take time, but the nonsense of, oh, this is what I know my students need and my school needs. No, it's over. The bullshit.
So over. So listen, Pam.
Your district, right? You live in Long Island.
Yeah, but it's different. So let me step in. Yeah. So what Judy is saying is true of New York City, Pam, but it's different all over New York. So it's
versus state.
It's really quite different. In the city, they are definitely mandating the structured literacy, and they're giving schools a choice of 3 different programs to choose from.
HMH.
That also is a little, let me finish, Judy. So it's questionable, in terms of what they have, but all over Long Island, it could really vary depending upon the district. And we happen to have 124 school districts just on Long Island. So you can see how different it is. So Pam, you mentioned in the article about leaders, and I'm going to take a quote right from here, that they could cruise on the coattails of their zip codes. That's very interesting, because that's something that I certainly see living here on Long Island. We have a lot of wealthy school districts. Where Judy lives in Connecticut, certainly there's quite a lot of wealth there too. Could you talk about that?
I think that's a really important concept, actually, Faith. Here in Australia, our national assessment of literacy and numeracy is called NAPLAN, which stands for National Assessment Program Literacy and Numeracy, and it's done in years 3, 5, 7, and 9. So the first proper indication, and it's probably really a bit too late, is year 3 at a national level of how students are going. And we know that socioeconomic status is a significant contributor to NAPLAN data. Now, this is where things become problematic, because there are certain stakeholders who say some children don't read and write well because they live in poor communities, because their parents are not so affluent, the schools are maybe not so well resourced, or the communities are more complex or whatever. And then that's the end of the argument almost. And the next argument is, so therefore those schools need more money. And this becomes purely a debate about money. Now, money is a part of the equation, of course, but I find it perplexing. And in many cases, it's educators who play that line, that this is all about socioeconomic advantage or disadvantage. But to me, that seems to be doing a huge disservice to their educator colleagues who are in the classrooms, very often making the difference. And what happens in the classroom, the actual instructional experiences that students experience, is about the only lever that we can pull in the lives of those children. Yes, we can advocate for better government policies around housing and mental health services and, justice services and transport and everything. We can advocate for those and should advocate for those, but of course they change from one electoral cycle to another. What we can change and what individual teachers can change is what goes on in their classrooms. And there is a fixed cost associated with having a teacher in a classroom in front of 25 or 30 children. It doesn't change whether they're doing balanced literacy or structured literacy instruction. The fixed cost is the same. So to me, I think we need to flip this on its head and say that socioeconomic factors shouldn't be contributing as much as they are. We're allowing them to contribute way too much. And then, for as I said, for some stakeholders, this is kind of the get out of jail free card for changing anything in the instructional space, where the instructional space is certainly in the short term the only thing that we can change. And I can think of schools, and I'm sure you can too, that are in quite disadvantaged communities where leaders, and I've linked to one in that article at Churchill Primary in Gippsland in Victoria, which is in a quite socioeconomically disadvantaged community, but the leader there, Jackie Burrows, has done remarkable things in changing the instructional model and improving not only students' academic achievement, so their literacy and numeracy, but also their well-being. So she's seen a huge reduction in behaviour incidents, for example, in that school. So I think we need to move beyond it's all just about zip codes or postcodes, and oh dear, what can we do? We can't do anything until the government gives those schools more money. That's nonsense. Where's that bullshit button?
There it is.
Thank you. Because schools, the discomfort for some people is the fact that there are schools making change. They are doing it. They're just getting on with it, and they're making those changes, which gives the lie to the argument that nothing can change until governments just pour money into these underperforming schools. They're underperforming because of the instructional environment and the instructional experiences that those children are experiencing. So let's honour our teachers by respecting what they can actually do if they're given appropriate professional learning and coaching and support. It's not a matter of saying next Monday, just teach this way. This is a 3 to 5 year journey in most cases, but 3 to 5 years is going to go past anyway. So where do you want your school to be in 3 to 5 years' time? Where they are now? Or do you want them to be kicking it out of the park, or at least doing better?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more that the money issue is just always an excuse, and it is a bunch of BS. And I could tell you that there are plenty of kids sitting in high-performing school districts where there are, lots and lots of resources, and they're struggling. And where do they go? They go to people who tutor like us, and and that's they make the school districts still stay on top because they're going outside the school district. Those numbers are not factored in, that they're going.
And it fudges the data
right. Exactly.
in those cases. And so we don't actually have a good understanding of what the inputs are for the data outputs in jurisdictions like the one that I live here in Victoria in Australia, where responsibility is devolved by the government sector to individual schools, and Victoria does relatively well on NAPLAN, which I don't think is a very high bar, but we do relatively well on NAPLAN. But my point to the government is, well, you don't know what the inputs are, because you don't know how many schools have shifted away from balanced literacy towards a more structured and explicit approach with better informed teachers. You don't know how many parents are paying for tutors. There are too many unknowns. So we don't actually have a model that could be scaled up for another jurisdiction, because we don't know how it works, which of course poses risks in terms of other states now starting to get more organised. Maybe over time Victoria will lose some of its apparent advantage with respect to NAPLAN. I care less about those kind of league tables than I do about the futures of individual children, and particularly children who are starting from behind and whose lives we can make better. Better reading instruction won't vaccinate children against every kind of adversity. It will just help. It will just give them a fighting chance. It's a protective factor against the inevitable challenges and adversities that all children are going to encounter, but particularly children who do come from those lower socioeconomic, more challenging communities.
Yes. Yeah. Judy works in the Bronx, by the way. I don't know if you're familiar with different boroughs in New York City.
A little bit.
Yeah, so she's in the Bronx, working in a district with great poverty. So Judy, maybe you could speak to what Pam just said about the protective factor that structured literacy can provide.
So I just want to also say, Pam, your article in general was the most straightforward, easy to read, and really, like, it just, everything you said, it was like I didn't want to put the pencil down. I don't usually like to take a lot of notes, but like you were so straightforward in what you had to say. The earth, we know it's not flat, right? It's not flat. We know what's best for kids, and there's still people that are fighting back. When you know what's best for kids, it's just so strange. But I did like, Pam, that you had a sense of optimism that you said 10 years from now, you think that this will be, you know, a laughable matter that, you know, most people will hopefully understand.
I hope so.
So
I
I
hope
saw
so.
some optimism, and I'm seeing some optimism right now. And then there was another thing that you said that, you know, not learning how to read is almost like a cancerous situation. It's a cancerous impact of poor reading instruction can really affect children as they become adults. It will affect maybe where they get a job, or if they get a job.
If they get a job.
It will affect the ability to write a resume. You know what? We could say there's ChatGPT, but there's certain skills that humans still need to have in order to function well in society. And being able to communicate, being able to read, being able to work on your oral language the way it looks in a structured literacy classroom. These are really key pieces of becoming a successful person and being able to function in life. So it's really important. And, you know, it makes me really sad because I see my students and, you know, I have a lot of hope for them, but I don't really know what their life looks like. Many of the students that I've worked with, they live in shelters. They don't have a very happy home. And, you know, thank God I come from immigrant parents that came to this country, you know, to strive for a better life for me. And thank God, you know, I kind of made it, right? I became a school teacher. I don't know what the life of my students look like. Some of those parents are just fighting to get food on the table for their kids, and they might not even get food on their family's table. They might have to rely on the shelter. So how can we deprive those same students that are definitely not getting academic tutoring after school the chance to be successful, literate humans? I mean, look, when we look way back, Frederick Douglass, who lived in the time of slavery, he learned how to read. And and that impacted his life forever. But we can't make a difference in 2023. I had a question. So laws are changing here, Pam. We just had a lawyer on our show a couple of days ago.
I heard that. Yes.
Oh, you did? Great.
Yeah.
It was a really fun episode. So are laws changing at all in Australia down under? And do you guys have mandated universal screeners? We have been seeing screeners here now in New York and Connecticut. Hopefully Faith is seeing some screeners out there. What's going on down under? I know that you're saying that there's still things in place, but it doesn't sound like you guys are where we're at or where I'm at.
I don't think we're at the point where laws are changing. People like me who are advocating for change are advocating for policy level change in how reading is taught. So Australia has 8 states and territories, and in all of those, a little bit like America, I think the responsibility at a government level for education is devolved to the states, and then how the states deal with that differs across those 8 states and territories. Some of them devolve responsibility down to individual schools. Others are moving to more prescriptive approaches. So we had an exciting announcement last week from Queensland, saying that they are investing a significant amount of money and strategic effort in overhauling reading instruction in government schools, moving away from balanced literacy. They've managed, it would seem, from what I can see, they've managed to get the teacher unions on board with that. And this is a left-wing government that is doing this, which is positive in the sense that I think it's more likely to be supported if there's a change of government to a more right-wing government, that they're likely to give this bipartisan support and not unpack it if there's a change of government, which, you know, we know these things require a sustained effort over a long period of time. You're turning around an ocean liner when you, at system level, try to change reading instruction, and it's very easy for people to call time too soon and say it's not working or we don't like it. So we've got to have something that is our brand, that we've got our names all over. So I'm hoping that will be sustained. So, and we've seen some exciting system level changes in the Catholic sector in Australia as well, with the Canberra Goulburn project, which I linked to in that blog post. So Canberra is the national capital of Australia, and the Australian Capital Territory is one of the two territories, and the Canberra Goulburn Archdiocese is, as the name suggests, it's partly the Australian Capital Territory, but it also reaches into southern New South Wales. And they've had very strong leadership there over the last few years under Ross Fox, and they have taken their school system away from balanced literacy, and they've mandated in that system, and they've supported professional learning for teachers in that system and coaching away from balanced literacy. And the staff have reported very favourably on it. And I think we're just starting to see data shifts now. So we need to remember that, as I often say, it takes 3 to 5 years to be an overnight success. And we often hear about things when the successes are visible. And so it's easy to think, oh, they've done this quickly or easily. But of course, it takes time and sustained effort. But are we seeing law changes? No. But if we can get a greater system level top-down prescriptiveness, which is what I'm arguing for in this recent blog post, and as you would have seen, I point out that systems are prescriptive on other things that matter a lot for children's lives, even though the evidence is going to change over time. So, and I use the example of anaphylaxis.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily set in stone as to how best to manage the risk of anaphylactic reactions in schools and how best to train staff and so forth. That knowledge will change over time. But systems recognise the importance of giving to school leaders the best possible evidence right now, because, well, it happens to matter how you manage an anaphylactic reaction, how you prevent it, and how you respond if it occurs. And I would argue, and I'm sure you would too, that it happens to matter how we teach reading. It's just that when we get it wrong, there's more of a slow burn adverse reaction for children than there is when a child who has a peanut allergy has an anaphylactic reaction. But we don't say, oh, look, we'll wait until the scientists have done another 10 years more research. And in the meantime, you just do your own thing and develop your own set of guidelines. There would be outrage in the community if we did that. But people try to play that card, and I think it's inauthentic and disingenuous to play that card on reading, because we do know enough to know what is going to get the vast majority of children across the bridge from oral language in the first 5 years of life, which is, as we know, biologically primary, and the vast majority of children are going to arrive at school, yes, with different levels of oral language abilities, but they're going to arrive in the main with discourse level communication skills. But we have to get them across the bridge from those biologically primary skills to the biologically secondary skills of reading, writing, and spelling in the first 3 years of school. And we know how to do that. It would be a different conversation altogether if we didn't have good knowledge about how to do that. I think the shame here, at every meaning of that word, in it being unfortunate and embarrassing, is that we are not applying that evidence.
It's so funny. I'm listening to you speak, and I've had this conversation with clients of mine, one of whom is a doctor. And she would say to me, I don't understand. In medicine, when there are updates, when there are changes, we have to go along with it.
Yep.
And she doesn't understand why in education it doesn't work the same like in medicine. It just doesn't make any sense. In your article, Pam, you mentioned that balanced literacy is an approach to reading instruction that works best for the adults. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I've been saying that for a very long time, and I've written about that in my own book. That,
sorry, I wasn't aware of that.
No, but not. What I'm saying is that it resonates with me, and it was really something that is. I feel strongly about that. It's never really about the kids. This is about adult preferences and their comfort level. And if you could just talk about that.
Sure. Well, the first set of adults that it works for are education academics and faculties, schools of education in universities, who don't need to be bothered by employing academics who have a deep knowledge of how the English writing system works, of children's oral language development and linguistics, and how we came to have the writing system that we have in English from a historical perspective, how we have the sound spelling correspondences that we have. So that's easy. You're probably aware of a report that was written, I think it was published, might have been about 2017. It was an Australian desktop audit that Jennifer Buckingham and one of her colleagues, I think it was Linda Meeks, did, of the publicly available information about education degrees in Australia, primary education degrees in Australia. And they found that, and so of course it's limited by the fact that they were working with publicly available data, because for a whole range of reasons, those universities wouldn't have agreed to provide more detailed information. But that's a level playing field when you go with what's publicly available. And what they found was that in some cases, reading, the literacy reading instruction part of the curriculum in teaching degrees was being taught by people who had drama and art backgrounds, phys ed, physical education. Now, there's nothing wrong with those backgrounds. They're important in initial teacher education, but not for teaching something as complex and important as reading. So going back to your question, Faith, this works really nicely for the adults if we just don't engage fully with the complexity of the reading process. And I deliberately use the word reading rather than literacy. Education, academics and schools of education love talking about critical literacy and multiple literacy and digital literacy. When was the last time either of you who are tutors had a child referred to you because of problems with their multiple literacies? It just doesn't happen. You have children referred because they have reading difficulties. So it just makes life so much easier if we can pretend that what we're dealing with is this nice kind of superficial thing called literacy that plays to the things that the adults like talking about and doing, like reading beautiful children's books to children in class. Well, who doesn't love doing that? We all love reading beautiful children's books to children, and we should be reading beautiful children's books to children. We just can't kid ourselves that that's teaching them how to read. That's
can you click on the other button?
There, whoops, there it is.
That's our cheers button.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, it works well for big publishing houses. Now, my caveat here, of course, is that education is a commercial space. We know that education is a commercial space. That's not a crime. People are going to produce materials for teachers to use in classroom. The problem is that some of them are going to align with evidence about what the reading process is and how best to teach it, and some of them are not. And in many cases, schools are spending huge sums of money on resources that don't align with that evidence, and in a sense kind of encouraging teachers to outsource the teaching of reading to big publishing houses. So, if you're using leveled readers and multi-queuing and so forth, somehow that's a train that everybody gets on, and everybody gets off at the reading station, the literacy station at the end of the journey. But not all children get to the end of the line. And when you say to a teacher, well, this child's on supposedly, level K, what do you need to do to get them to the next level? And in many cases, through no fault of their own, teachers can't answer that question because they're not actually actively teaching children how to read. So I think we need to be honest about the fact that we have reconfigured reading into something that the adults like more as literacy, and we've sort of smeared Vaseline on the lens, and we just kind of put all kinds of practices in the mix, throw enough paint at the wall and hope that some of it sticks for a majority of children. And in reality, as you both know, more than 50% of children do learn to read in balanced literacy classrooms. That's been the saviour of balanced literacy, that it works for, I would say, a marginal majority of children. I think those children would be much better spellers. Those same ones who succeed or look like they succeed in balanced literacy for reading would be much better spellers. And I hear from a lot of adults who say, oh, I went to school in whole language balanced literacy and I can read, but I can't spell to save myself. And that's because these two things are not taught as related skill sets. So I think we all need to be careful about decisions that we make for other people's children. And, when we ourselves are proficient in reading, writing and spelling, and I make that comment most particularly to education academics who, by definition, are literate people, but they're making decisions for other people's children that can be profoundly and in many cases adversely life-changing by not ensuring that at a population level, children are being exposed to high-quality reading instruction practices. I also think it's very damaging for the morale of teaching and the professional standing of teaching as well, for this knowledge that I sometimes describe as the good china, and it's the good china that belongs to teachers. This knowledge is being withheld, and then I would say in many cases willfully withheld from teachers.
Correct. Pamela, I am totally in agreement with what you just said. It is such a shame that I started teaching. I started in education in 1997, started teaching in 2000, and I only learned about my syllable types about 7 or 8 years ago. Why? That's terrible. That's terrible. That's unacceptable. And I remember being at Brooklyn College, all those classes for my master's level, there was nothing, not one class related to literacy instruction. It was about themes, and we were cutting out magic fish and doing arts and crafts. It was completely nonsense. It was terrible. And I think you made so many good points in the article that we basically have a generation that feels very comfortable making excuses for why kids can't read. Some of those excuses that you included were, oh, don't worry, some kids take longer, or, oh, we have to find books that the child is passionate about, or, oh, don't worry, that child is a boy and boys take longer, or writing and spelling, don't worry, we have ChatGPT, we have voice recognition, they don't have to move a pencil. It's a generation of excuses, And I think you made another really, really valid and excellent point that I always tell my teachers as well. And I have to actually say, one of those, in reading recovery, there was one good thing that I learned. It was to focus on strengths and really, think about what as a practitioner you could do differently, which is really to the core of my soul now. So that was one of the things we were taught. And I wish more reading recovery people would come out and say they've made shifts like I did. But we have those kids for 7 hours a day. Instead of saying, oh, the parents don't read to them, oh, forget about it. No. Oh, it all starts in the home. Why don't we start thinking about, we have them for 7 precious hours. Let's give this our heart and soul. It's not that hard. Let's give them the instruction that they deserve, that follows a scope and sequence, that aligns with the 5 pillars of literacy and writing, that follows, all the best evidence-based methods. And guess what? We would have a lot more kids that were successful and thriving. And exactly what Faith said also. So what? So I had a couple of reading recovery kids that did great. But now the research is finding that a lot of those kids, way later, they crashed and burned. They probably couldn't decode those multisyllabic words in 9th grade that well. They probably couldn't write an essay that their spelling would look as strong as it did in a structured literacy class. And, we just had on another guest, Faith. Was it a surprise? I don't even know. We have so many amazing breaking news stories lately. We just had, Karen Harris on our show speaking about writing instruction.
It didn't come out yet. It did not come out yet.
It's not come out yet. It's coming soon.
I'll look forward to that.
Yes, she was amazing. She was amazing.
There's even something for me to learn. You know what? We haven't gone to the surface level in terms of writing instruction. Knowing how to write the 3 top forms of writing is important. How to persuade, how to entertain, how to inform. There's so much to it. And we have to learn it, embrace it, and give it to our kids. We really do.
So I'm going to go back here because I love what Judy was saying. Listening to her, by the way, when Judy and I first started doing this, she was definitely more protective of her background in reading recovery. And as we went on, you could see a change in her as well.
I mean, Faith, you're right. There's definitely been a shift. I love decodables way more now than I did before. And I see the value because when you do it in the field, you see it working for kids. You see that less kids are confused than when they're reading levels and then they're doing foundations and it doesn't match. And decodables are wonderful for a short window of time. Now, at the same token, I'll be sitting in my car and sometimes I'll be like, you know what? Reading recovery is where my whole journey started as a literacy person. It's where I learned to sit near a kid and watch them in the field. It's where I learned how to watch how a pencil was moving. It's where I learned how to use Elkonin boxes. So I will never minimize that journey, be embarrassed about that journey because it's a big, big, big part of who I am. And I think I'm as good as I am now because of that journey, and I'm only getting better.
So Pam, I want to jump in. From your article, you said nobody is going back to balanced literacy once they started with structured literacy. You don't see them going back. And I think what Judy is saying, she sees the light now and she's not going back. So could you talk a little bit about that, Pam, about, the idea is that these leaders, these administrators, how do they answer to that? If we're all shifting one way and nobody's saying, oh, you know what, this isn't working, we're going back to balanced literacy, that's not happening. Could you talk about that?
I think it's another way of fact-checking the idea that, well, there's just a range of approaches and you can pick and choose, as my colleague Lorraine Hammond says, from a buffet, and choose the ones you like and don't choose the ones that you don't like. If there really was a range of approaches that were of equal merit and impact and strength, then we would see people going the other way. but we don't. I'm not aware of any school, and I'm very happy to be proved wrong on this, but I'm not aware of any school that is taking a structured, explicit approach and then deliberately says, no, we've had to think about this and we think balanced literacy is going to be better. I am aware of schools where there's been some shift towards structured, explicit literacy teaching, and there's been a change of leadership, and that work kind of gets undone or is undermined, unfortunately, by lack of ongoing commitment from the new leader. But I've never seen somebody say, you know, based on our data, this explicit teaching thing, if it's being done properly, isn't working, and we're going to adopt balanced literacy. I'm also not aware, by the way, of, and I'm sure you're not either, but I'm always happy again to be proven wrong, any studies that say that balanced literacy is the optimal way to get the vast majority of children across that bridge to proficiency after 3 years of formal schooling. It's a preferred way in many sectors, but support for an approach is not the same as evidence for an approach.
I think that's another.
Now, that's not, I borrowed that line from someone else, and I can't remember exactly who I borrowed that line from. It's not my original thought, but I do think it's a very powerful reminder that just because there's lots of support for something doesn't mean that there's also lots of or necessarily any evidence for it. And there's lots of people support the idea of balanced literacy and the practice of balanced literacy. That doesn't make it an evidence-based approach.
Yes, you know, what's very interesting, what I'm hearing now is the term comprehensive literacy plan. We have a district here on Long Island that they are saying that what they're doing is evidence-based, and they throw out sound bites and slogans, and they know all the right things to say. And they had their teachers sit on a team and develop a comprehensive literacy plan. And I have a feeling that there are other districts out there trying to do this, as you would say, choose their own adventure and make it comfortable, make it comfortable. So what is your take on that term, comprehensive literacy plan? Because we want people to know that reading is more than phonics. And that's what seems to be out there, that a lot of BL proponents will, you know, throw that out and say, well, it's all about phonics and everything is phonics. So we want them to know it's about language, and it is comprehensive, but the comprehensive plan that they're coming up with just brings us right back to the same point, balanced literacy. So could you, Pam, straighten that out for us, for everyone? I would love to hear what you have to say.
Well, I can try, but I think it's a case of buyer beware. Caveat emptor, as the Latin expression reminds us when we're buying a house. And we need to apply a high level of scrutiny and I think skepticism when people are putting new labels. Why does it need a new label? Are we just, you know, doing some window dressing here? Is it like what happened after it became apparent that whole language was tainted, and it was a tainted brand almost, and there was that reluctant acknowledgement that yes, phonics was important. So, you know, some very clever people came up with the term balanced literacy. And I think it's worth going back and looking at that wonderful 2018 Ending the Reading Wars paper by Anne Castles, Kathy Rastall and Kate Nation, where they talk about the fact that it would be nice in the future if balanced literacy can mean a comprehensive approach to all aspects, if you like, right across the reading rope, if you like. Because fundamentally, I think, you know, when we peel the onion on these debates, what we find is the critical point of difference is how children are going to be taught to decode, how they're going to be taught how speech and print map to each other. Are we going to be teaching that in an incidental, embedded, ad hoc kind of way, or are we going to be putting an emphasis on that in the early stages of reading instruction, and accepting that that is a technical skill that is going to be quite effortful, that there is going to be some necessary effort for children in remembering the orthographic patterns within words and the sounds associated with particular letters and letter combinations. That's cognitively effortful for children. And as many have pointed out, and I think here of the work of Margaret Goldsworthy, and a fantastic interview that she and her colleague Alana, whose surname I can't remember, did on an early season of the Science of Reading podcast, where, and as previous balanced literacy teachers, they said, yes, it really is effortful in the early stages, but that's necessary effort because we're teaching a technical skill set, but a transferable skill set. So it doesn't matter what you call your approach to literacy. What I'm going to go looking for is how you're going to teach children to decode unfamiliar words. And if your approach to decoding unfamiliar words is going to be relying on teaching children sight words, 3Qing, getting them to look at pictures, using predictable text, I'm going to say that's balanced literacy. That you've just it's mutton dressed as lamb. It's the same old. Nobody disagrees about the importance of teaching vocabulary. Who gets up in the morning to have an argument about the importance of vocabulary or sentence structure or inferencing or background knowledge? The essential, unavoidable difference is how we teach children how to find their way through an unfamiliar word, and whether we're prepared to invest in the teacher knowledge that supports children to do that efficiently, to get to automaticity quickly, so that they are getting to meaning. Because, of course, reading is about finding meaning in the text. But if we start with meaning, that's like saying we're going to teach children the piano and we're going to play Mozart piano concertos to them. And that's going to teach them, that's going to turn them into pianists.
Right, what to know all the notes. You're going to learn all the notes by just listening to Beethoven.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. When we teach children the piano, for some reason, everybody seems to accept that we're going to be teaching them the correspondence between the notation on the page and the keys on the keyboard. That's okay. That's not teaching them to bark at music. And it's not killing the love of music. It's creating the proficiency that's needed in order to become a musician. And I don't know why we can't apply the same logic, or we can't consistently apply the same logic, but I think it goes back to the problem of balanced literacy being so much more convenient for the adults, because we don't have to know how to teach those things and put the effort. And there does need to be effort. I would argue, from having sat in a number of early years classrooms, that it's fast-paced, it's engaging, and seeing the children learn and rejoicing in their learning, calls into question, I suppose, the word effort, but it needs focus.
Yes. Judy, in the article, Pam said, they are called primary or elementary skills as a clue to where they should be taught. And I think what Pam is saying, that clearly the tipping point, the most pivotal point about structure here, is to make sure that those word reading skills are taught so that they could free their brains up to do all those other things, which we all agree on, even though that seems to be where the proponents of balanced literacy will say that, oh, we ignore those types of things. And that's not the case at all. So in your school district, in the city, you're getting these core programs in. As a coach, how do you ensure that this is taught then in those primary school grades to make sure that this is happening, and not to start infusing all these other things, as Pam said, the sight words and the all the other ways to read a word other than left to right and all through a word decoding?
Well, I think like even using the word sight word, we just took it out of our vocabulary, and Foundations has the word trick word because they haven't updated their program in a while. We don't even call it really trick words anymore. There are parts of those words that are irregular, and these are the sounds it's making in that word. And, some of the science is now showing that making the hearts, I don't know if that's science-based, but I know UFLI and other places put the hearts. There's certain parts of those words that are irregular, and you might need to know those parts by heart. They're a little harder maybe for you, but we're really looking at the entire word. And I think that it's unfortunate, thinking back to my reading recovery days, a lot of kids got their mouth ready for the first letter, but it didn't go much further than the first letter, because we were actually not trained on how to get much further. A little bit here, a little bit there, a sprinkle of an R and an E says read, but then whatever, it stops. And then we were told kind of like, oh, don't have them sound out too much because that's going to confuse their brain and mess up meaning. But no, telling kids not to sound it out, that's the course of action. Take your finger, put it in, don't tap while you're reading, take that finger in, look at that word, make those sounds, slide through. And if you're having trouble with the sound, guess what? Like in the name, snow, it could say oh or ow, and talk to a kid about that, and then let them slide after you gave them that information. And I think teachers are more aware now. I think that once they start, talking about the science and seeing the progress that kids are making when you are teaching them in a way that's explicit and structured, following a scope and sequence, it makes sense. But that, there's also going to be hard days, even in a structured literacy model. I think, on Friday, a couple of my teachers felt, down in the dumps. I didn't even get to go on their data trackers yet. They said the kids bombed one of the unit assessments, and that can happen even in a structured literacy model. But guess what? We come optimistic tomorrow morning on a Monday, and now we have beautiful data that's aligned to a scope and sequence where we say, you know what? The kids didn't get it this time. How can we make it more explicit? How can we reteach the concepts that were difficult? How can we make sure that the foundation is solid, and see how they do a couple of days later? You can't just skip over those foundational skills. We can't keep letting those cracks exist. And I really, 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 really am sad that there's not more people speaking up in the balanced literacy world like I am. I know there's people listening though, right? We have people messaging us, and I am proud that
people are opening up and listening.
I think so. And it doesn't mean that you're switching sides or on a different team. It's not like you're the Mets versus the Giants or whatever's popular, down under. I don't even know what sports team is popular. I'm not really on a side. I'm thinking about what's
we need
best
to be on the side of children.
Yes, that's the side. Yes,
that's all that matters. And
that, the world is having a hard time in terms of so many things right now, and even the term reading wars is so divisive and makes people stay attached to beliefs rather than being on the side of children. So I think we have to shift away from that term reading wars. And maybe there's another word we could use. What's another word we could use, Faith? You're usually pretty good at words.
Well, I think I'm going to shift it to Pam's article, because what this line, I think, says it all. In all cases, the evidence will evolve over time, but you are expected to apply the highest standards as they apply today. not to do your own thing until every possible research question has been resolved. And so, Pam, could you talk a little bit about that? Because obviously this is written about leadership, administrators, and Judy is saying something about the reading wars, how we need to move away from that because it's so divisive. How do you win leaders over? By looking at what we have now in this moment today and make them realize that instead of it being about a power struggle, power and control, that we need to think about the kids first. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Such an important question, Faith. You'd be familiar with the old saying that the first casualty in any war is truth. And I think that's really hard for leaders because they have to be across so many diverse topics. Their portfolios are very complex, I think, and I think you would agree that reading is a huge part of the portfolio of an elementary or primary school leader's work. But I think we need to have conversations that remind people that when there's two very polarized positions, which there are unfortunately on reading instruction, that it's easy to think and to reassure ourselves that going into the middle is somehow going to be the sensible resolution. You know, we try to resolve so many things by saying, well, people have just got to meet each other halfway and it's got to be some compromise and so forth. That's sometimes referred to as the fallacy of the golden mean, the idea that there's a midpoint that is a sweet spot. And that's really, for me, how balanced literacy came about. You know, it represents the fallacy of the golden mean. So I think we need to be saying to leaders that just as in other aspects of your work, such as anaphylaxis management, such as child safety, bullying, there is some evidence that is stronger than others that indicates the best way forward now. And as leaders, that's the evidence that you should be seeking and applying. I would encourage leaders to talk to other leaders and you know, perhaps ideally to start off with in schools that have similar socioeconomic kind of characteristics, but leaders who have undertaken change and find out what it's been like for them, what difficulties they encountered, what wins they achieved, what their staff reported, what their parents reported. So I think we need our leaders to be curious and open and to have some level of I guess, scientific literacy about the idea that we do need to be asking about evidence. And school leaders, of course, you know, are not necessarily well trained through no fault of their own in critiquing evidence. That's not part of what initial teacher education has had a big focus on. So I think we need to be supporting leaders to have those critical conversations and to call out trite memes like, you know, every child learns differently and you know, this will work for some children and not for other children, or this is about teaching children to bark at print, or phonics is already in there. A big one that I hear is, well, phonics is in the curriculum, so therefore it's already being taught. And of course, you know, we know there's phonics and there's different ways of teaching phonics. So I think we need to guide our leaders through what is a complex territory, but to help them to appreciate that there are some approaches that have higher levels of support than others. And as a consequence, it's not okay to be just sticking with what is familiar and known. if there's better ways of doing things, we expect the aviation industry to apply them. We've already talked about doctors, health. It's not just doctors, it's nursing, it's psychology, it's all the allied health professions, engineering. We expect all of those other disciplines to apply better ways once we're pretty confident that they are better, then they're expected to be applied. And we continue to monitor changes in evidence and make adjustments as we go forward. So this is not about saying that things are set in stone. And as Steve Dykstra so eloquently discusses, we've got that bullseye in the middle, and then we've got the rings around it. And sometimes we've got to make intelligent decisions in the rings around the things that we do know with a high level of certainty. But we've got to stop giving ourselves excuses and allowing ourselves to make excuses. As Anita Archer says, cut the fluff and teach the stuff.
Yeah.
That's a big shift for a lot of schools and a lot of teachers. The idea that teachers are going to stand in front of children and actually actively teach, rather than be overseeing a whole lot of project-based, discovery-based learning right from day one of what you call kindergarten. We call it all kinds of things in Australia. But that's a big conceptual shift.
Yes, not being the guide by the side, right?
But
the sage on the stage. So it is a shift. Pam, you've been such an amazing guest. You are such a powerhouse out there. I've been following you for years. I admire you. I remember when I first met you at the Reading League.
Syracuse.
And it was just really a highlight for me. Every article you write, you are spot on. As Judy said, it's so easy to understand, and you use such great analogies. And
Yes.
I really would tell people out there, follow the Snow Report. Every blog is just packed with information. Is there anything we forgot to ask or mention that you would like to add?
I don't think so. I think you've managed to cover it in a very wide-ranging kind of way. So thank you. Thank you for your kind words. But Faith, I've also been following you and your work for a number of years, and it was lovely for me too when we met in Syracuse back whenever it was, around 2018 maybe. And Judy, it's lovely to connect with you.
I hope I meet you one day in person as well.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. And I'll stay very connected to your podcast because I've been so enjoying the episodes that I've listened to so far.
Well, thank you. We have, Judy, right? We have some great interviews coming up. As Judy mentioned, we have Dr. Karen Harris coming up, and she's going to talk about her writing research.
Fantastic.
That has been around for 40 years or more, and it has now just been getting a lot of attention. It's self-regulated development. I'm losing it. SRSD. But yes. Self-regulated strategy development, excuse me, I just blanked out for a moment, but she was fantastic. We have Stephen Chulo and Allison Collins from Texas State University talking about writing research and how teachers view themselves as writers and how their comfort level with teaching writing. So that's going to be fascinating. So lots of good things coming up. And you mentioned Jennifer Buckingham, and we're going to be talking with her too. So, so we have the Australian group, the powerhouse, coming to the Literacy View. Judy, did I forget anything? Would you like to add anything, or do you want to just hit it with all ways to get in touch with us?
Just one more thing, everybody. Please make sure that all these skills that you're working on, change takes time, and the application piece in those classrooms is critical too. That's the big shift that my school we're about to make this week, is looking at that screener data and now seeing how we can, form our groups look at our tiered instruction and make sure that kids are actually reading books. So make sure those kids are actually getting that practice. This is the time of year to like say, you know what, we have the data, let's get this done. So anyway, thank you, Pam. It was a pleasure and an honor to speak with you today. I am so lucky to be here with you. And here we are wrapping up. So follow us on Facebook, The Literacy View, Real Teachers Letting Loose. Follow us also on Instagram, The Literacy View. Follow us on our personal Instagrams at Boxner-Damsky. Follow Faith on Instagram at High Five Literacy. Follow us on Twitter at Boxner-Judy. Follow Faith on Twitter at Faith Borkowski. Also follow us on the Literacy View, Real Teachers Letting Loose YouTube channel. Keep writing those messages, keep writing those comments. We are just having the best time with you guys. And also follow us on our podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And also, Faith, can we say thank you for one of the amazing reviews from Sean Morrissey out there?
Oh my goodness, that was great.
Sean,
Thank you. That was great.
We're happy you had some wine. Finger Lakes while you were watching the Literacy View, and your comparison of saying we're like the what show, Faith?
Was the we're the intellectual version of the Jersey Shore.
We take it as a big compliment. We're having a great time. And you know what? It's not easy, you know, having fun and laughing when you're talking about something that's so serious, but we're hoping that everybody's having a great time learning and growing with us. So thank you, everyone.
Yes.
And thank you both as well.
Thank you.